Hi, everybody. Anthony here today. And although we are in the middle of seasons 1 and 2 of Café Unconscious, I thought I would try out a little bonus episode. My co-host and good friend Tommy is not here with me today, but I did ask him to share some thoughts on the topic of synchronicity in general and synchronicity in Twin Peaks. And what I got from him is a recording of a mixture of read writing that he already did and sort of off the cuff thoughts. So I'm going to listen and respond as we go. So here we go. Bonus episode starts now.
In episode 4 or 5, depending on where you stand on the is the pilot counted argument, Cooper says, when two separate events occur simultaneously pertaining to the same object of inquiry, we must always pay strict attention. And with that, synchronicity and Jungian ideology are included into the lore of Twin Peaks.
Okay, Tommy has said this a number of times on the show, and the degree to which that statement is accurate is probably not arguable, but the degree to which synchronicity is intended as a Jungian concept in Twin Peaks is certainly arguable. But he is right. As soon as synchronicity comes into the show, explicit, especially in such an explicit manner, we do have one of the primary Jungian concepts. And I am very, very mildly schooled in Jungianism, and I have not read any Jung directly. I have this book from the library, which is sort of an overview, and I'm only about a half a chapter into it. So take what I say with a cup of salt, much more than a grain. But it's a good point. And for the theory that Tommy's trying to forward, which is Twin Peaks is an actual demonstration of Jungianism in action, then this is a good point that he makes, and it's important.
The idea was so important to the creators that the line was plucked from the international pilot and reused. And in fact, understanding the idea of synchronicity may tell us something about how to view Twin Peaks as a whole. Psychologist Carl Jung introduced the concept of synchronicity to his work after observing strange circumstances involving himself and his patients. His research into the I Ching and various interconnected concepts permeating throughout religious and philosophical texts led him to coining this term. So let's get it directly from him. Jung says on synchronicity, it's a meaningful coincidence of two or more events where something other than the probability of chance is involved. He goes on to describe it as synchronicity is the coming together of the inner and outer events in a way that cannot be explained by cause and effect, and that is meaningful to the observer. Yes, that sounds identical to what Cooper is describing. And
I don't know what inner and outer events means, and two events being interpreted as meaningful it happens all the time.
one final quote before we seek synchronistic patterns in Twin Peaks. Speaking on the topic of synchronistic phenomena, Jung says, they prove that a content perceived by an observer can, at the same time, be represented by an outside event without causal connection. From this, it follows either that the psyche cannot be localized in space or that space is relative to the psyche. The same applies to the temporal determination of the psyche in the psychic relativity of time. I do not need to emphasize that the verification of these findings must have far-reaching consequences. So, in this quote, we see a hint of Jungianism being represented in the Black Lodge. We see a causal relationship between the dream and its external happenings out of time. We see the relationship between space, existence, non-existence, and consciousness. We see a relationship of television, electricity, and static, possibly as a reminder that the events of Twin Peaks are the narrative of the dreamer using a television show as the vessel of a subpsychic domain. And perhaps we're witnessing one half of a synchronistic event itself, the dream of the dreamer, occurring in the personal unconscious while reflecting the fragments of her external life, a life that we never quite get to witness. It might be that Twin Peaks itself is a synchronistic event. Because if Twin Peaks is a traumatic projection into the subconscious, a construct of complexes and archetypes fighting the forces of repression in a race to either reach individuation or remain cracked forever, then what we are seeing is the implanted.
Okay, so this clears up a little bit of what Tommy has said multiple times on the show. The stakes are a race to reach individuation or to remain cracked, damaged, incomplete, messed up forever. All right, but there was a big if there. So there was if this, then that. Let's see what the then is.
Splinters of a dreamer's psyche. This narrative exists while the dreamer's real life also exists. What they see and know reflects in the show, the personal drama itself. Everything the dreamer has ever lived and experienced, everything they like and they dislike, the media they consume, the books they read, the shows they watch, the people that they know, it's all uploaded into a stew of mashed up about information. Twin Peaks is a living narrative, as real as life itself, and it plays in the subconscious of the unaware designer.
That's interesting to think of the things going on beneath the surface as being as real as the external world that we live in. A stretch, perhaps, but maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe the internal world is, and even the unaccessible or rarely accessible internal world is as real as that outside of us. That doesn't feel like it's the case, but maybe so. And that's a big deal if it is.
In some sense, that's all of us. Our perspective is the reality we design, and our subpsyche plays archetypal mashups with our imagination. But while the unconscious drama plays, our life goes forth. We experience that, and it reflects in our unobtainable consciousness. This could be the grand synchronicity of Twin Peaks, the twin of Twin Peaks. Beyond the notion of just shadows, the ultimate duality could be the internal you and the external you living two distinct realities and triggering events for both sides simultaneously. This discussion, of course, is going to focus more on the internal, personal, unconscious drama that plays in the dreamer's head.
All right, so mutually reinforcing or mutually affecting components, the internal you and the external you, one influencing the other, but maybe without the conscious awareness in either direction.
A drama that's very true, a narrative that's real. You know, sometimes we get locked into that argument about if this is all a dream, well, then was it worth the admission of the ticket? And of course it is, right? The narrative is still as real as any narrative ever. Just as the personal unconscious, if what Jung says is true of the personal unconscious, the domain that lives inside of you that uses the archetypes and complexes of your life and the things that you know from a peripheral perspective, and then it sort of puts it all together, and that plays in sort of a dreamscape sense, so that it throws symbols and ideas and concepts at you so that you are greater than given the opportunity to sort of unlock yourself, especially in instances of trauma and or confusion for yourself. If he's right about any of that, then of course that's worth it, because that's truer than anything. Hell, that might be truer than your persona that you walk around with on a day-to-day basis and bumble into the people that you're at work with like the rest of us. What's happening in your subdomain, as illogical and wacky and strange as it is, just like it plays in Twin Peaks, it could be more true. It could be the most relevant you.
Okay, that's interesting. As far as everybody could relate to putting on a face or putting on a persona, a personality, a situationally appropriate or adaptive presentation of yourself as being maybe compromised in some way, although necessary, but not quite real. He makes an interesting point here about the maybe the internal world, the internal landscape. I don't personally feel like that's distinctly subconscious. I think there's all sorts of conscious processes happening inside that we don't share through the persona. But yeah, but the internal world sometimes I would say I agree with what he just says there, that the internal world is at times certainly more real than what is presented on the outside. Although there's the realness of the persona as well, because that's a real thing, that we all do. Blah, blah, blah.
So, regardless as to whether or not when they say dreamer and dream, if they actually mean it in that way, a way where a waking dream, a living dream, a dream plays inside of a person's perspective that they don't really have access to, but they themselves live in another entirely different externalized life. If that's true, that reality is still more real and it's still worth it, because that reality will get you to a closer version of truth, which is exactly what I think that the return is about. And I think that the stakes of the narrative, the good lodge, the bad lodge, the black lodge, the white lodge, the repression versus the individuation, I still think that those stakes are as real to this character, this dreamer, the one that we come into contact with, their many iterations of themselves spread apart by all of the characters that we walk into. Just like when we dream, we are we're manifesting, we are the narrative of all of those people, right? Just as that is true, I believe that the stakes are super high in the narrative of the television show Twin Peaks, because if I'm right, what I think the stakes are is whether or not this person is going to succumb to finally cracking under the pressure of this traumatic circumstance, and maybe even continued circumstances that they find themselves in because of the cyclical nature of trauma, or they're going to integrate and they're going to sort of go beyond that, which is sort of what I think we see happened. We see happen by the end of the show.
I still wonder why we care so much about these characters and this character.
The show not only parallels events in the world of Twin Peaks, but it highlights the hyper-real acting that occurs on the show proper. This informs us that a paradoxical relationship exists inside the Twin Peaks universe, one that ties the murder mystery to the events of television tropes, and revelatory information is provided by the external sources. It's almost suggesting that a narrative is being devised to inform the viewer of greater truths, not the least of which is the fact that the world of Twin Peaks has an external author. It could be that the dreamer is telling themselves that Twin Peaks is a dream that uses the television format of soap operas to represent their internal battle of integration versus repression. Carl Jung referred to this as the drama of the personal unconscious. By viewing the relationship of Twin Peaks and Invitation to Love as a self-generated revelation, we view it through the lens of Carl Jung's ideas of the personal unconscious, archetypes, and synchronicity. And that highlights how external narratives influence internal psychological ecosystems. There's a meta-commentary on the nature of TV, sure, but Invitation to Love serves as not only a parody of the 1980s soap opera, it reflects the idea of the personal unconscious. This suggests that the mirroring of events between the soap opera and the characters' lives serves as a metaphorical reminder of the dreamer's role in shaping their subconscious domain, highlighting the potential for individuation. If they can activate themselves by acquiring the lessons of Twin Peaks, they can propel themselves forward in the external world.
They could activate themselves by acquiring the lessons of Twin Peaks. They could propel themselves forward in the external world through, in part, the help of Invitation to Love, which is, Tommy's suggesting, a concoction of the subconscious domain as a way of reflecting the fact that Twin Peaks is a TV show. So it's a show reflecting a show, a mirror world to the inner world that is trying to help the dreamer take lessons away. The stuff that Tommy has said on Invitation to Love is very interesting, in my opinion, and really as good a interpretation of that strange device as any I've heard. And I hope he goes on a little bit here.
Carl Jung's idea of the personal unconscious combines repression, lost experiences, subliminal intuitions, symbols, and shadows that are unique to the individual.
Subliminal intuitions, symbols, and shadows unique to the individual, and yet still attached to the culture at large.
But that exist within all of us, hailing from the collective unconscious. According to Jung, the personal unconscious operates in manifestations, constructed through archetypes, or universal symbols, and complexes, both generated via autonomous characters or circumstances in your subpsyche. External stimuli such as the media, philosophy, religion, music, experiences, and ideas can infiltrate the personal unconscious, designing dream content and personal symbolism. These symbols reoccur throughout history, and in fact, there's a long-standing tradition of comparing unfathomable events to play acting. This disassociation serves as a sort of self-preservation, but ultimately it asks the dreamer to reconcile the fragments of themselves and to process in pieces that which has overwhelmed their emotional and mental capacity. Obviously, Invitation to Love is a melodramatic spoof of 1980s soap operas. Soap operas have been long characterized by their exaggerated circumstances, too many to count love triangles, and utterly nonsensical plot twists. Shows like Dallas and Dynasty reflect these tropes, featuring powerful families engaged in scandal and betrayal. Invitation to Love sends up these soap operas through its absurd characters and storylines, serving as a satirical reflection of the genre. But its reason for existing isn't confined to comedic relief. Invitation to Love not only critiques the soap opera format, but also highlights the melodramatic aspects of Twin Peaks, blending the line between reality and fiction within the series. It exposes the absurd nature of the show, Twin Peaks, and in some sense it admits that these circumstances are only relevant if they act as a puzzle to be solved. Because the circumstances of Invitation to Love often parallel those in Twin Peaks, and because the events of both shows typically result in the moving of the storyline forward, we can count these mirror events as a synchronistic relationship. These parallels go beyond a form of narrative or meta-narrative, though they most certainly are that, but it could serve as the author's own commentary on the main reason for having designed a drama in their personal unconscious. The dreamer could be offering themselves a lens through which to interpret the mysteries of Twin Peaks. It's an easy to point to example of synchronicity that demonstrates to the dreamer how to take in this fractured information happening within inside this drama. It could be that the dreamer uses Invitation to Love to recognize the use of external concepts in their internal world. And this
Could be that the dreamer is using Invitation to Love to help them recognize these disparate, these fractured, these piecemeal concepts from the external world that are working their way into the dreamer's subconscious. Because I think earlier Tommy said these things can't happen in coherent narrative ways. They could only happen in bite-sized, perhaps abstract pieces that can reveal themselves a bit by bit, and that do require some work in order to assemble them into a new meaning. And that to me says that they're not pre-meaning loaded, and that the dreamer would have to be sort of untangling the meaning that's ready, ready, made, but distributed bit by bit. But it says to me rather that through these little bits and the assembling or crafting of meaning from them, something new is constructed. So this would be sort of more of a constructivist approach, as opposed to unwrapping a puzzle, 300-piece puzzle in the box with all the pieces already cut to shape. And you just put the pre-fit shapes together and you get the message or the meaning that was there. No, this sounds like the puzzle pieces are perhaps a little bit amorphous in their shape. And your job is to sort of sync them together to create something that is a picture that wouldn't be on the cover of the box, which is, in fact, I think, the experience that most people who watch and think lightly or deeply, but interestingly about the show. Uh, I think a lot of us have that experience where you're sort of constructing meaning based on the pieces that are given to us. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
The indication that despite Twin Peaks being an archetypal projection, the stakes are to be taken very seriously. There's a price to be paid in not deciphering the symbols and events, and that price is most likely a life in the revolving door of traumatic personal hell, or
deciphering or constructing meaning. And that's something for Tommy and I to bookmark for another day.
or even complete mental collapse. Invitation to Love is issuing a warning to the dreamer. Don't become romanced by the intricacies of powerful families competing for land. Focus on the implications of adults with bad intentions. Don't be charmed by the escalating risk associated to secret love affairs, and see the comparisons of psychopathy that exists in people who associate pain to love. Don't fall down the rabbit hole, because it's not about the bunny. Let's talk about the synchronistic implications of Jeffries' arrival at the FBI office during Cooper's temporal event.
I'm going to eat a little bit.
When investigating the implications of Jeffries' sudden arrival to the FBI location and its synchronistic insinuations to Cooper's seemingly intuition-inspired temporal disruption, we not only come into contact with two unexplained events, but we also touch base with the concepts of dimension, mysticism, time loops, and layers of consciousness. Jeffries' arrival during Cooper's moment of temporal disruption draws out narrative questions, and it points to the destabilization of linear time in Twin Peaks. Is Cooper's premonition regarding the security cameras a necessary action that transfers Jeffries into this environment? Or does the fracturing of time open a doorway? And is it perhaps Jeffries that's been tapped by fate to introduce the concepts of Judy, extra-dimensional spaces, and a helpful warning about the identity of Cooper? Of course, we'll know more in concerns to those things later. But this moment bridges multiple time spans while using the FBI office as a nexus-like emblem reminiscent of the human memory. The office, much like the event itself, is a temporal intersection.
The FBI office as a emblem, much like the human memory. The office itself, the setting serving as symbolic function. That's interesting.
Now, perhaps the original intention of this event, as portrayed in Fire Walk with Me, is to A, highlight a pattern of Agent Cooper's vague clairvoyance, thereby crystallizing his premonitions into seasons 1 and 2, and B, reflect the eroded interior condition of Jeffries' psyche after having experienced extra-dimensional events. But, of course, our view of this event changes with time and context. The return puts us on the opposite side of this scene now, through new and added context of Gordon Cole's. From this perspective, Cooper's more like the channeling event that allows Jeffries to arrive with necessary information. Information that solidifies the existence of Jowday and confirms the intent of at least some foreign entities as to being malevolent. Now, this is not just a synchronistic event. This is a synchronistic event that takes place at the same time and at a different time at the same time. Of course, we, the audience, experience our own distortions of events given time and context. While the hippocampus is responsible for storing new memories in our mind, these memories rely heavily on context and perception, sensory perception. The prefrontal cortex adds context to these events, and the memories play as a representation depending on the reconstruction of those senses. If the encoding is murky, each replay will implant new fragments and then sort of fill those gaps. Sensory inputs themselves are converted into electrical signals, and distortions may skew that perception. The very idea of the field of consciousness relies on the neural field firing in synchronistic harmony. Like electrical interference can distort signals and result in static disruptions, and our own mind, as neural noise, can directly distort sensory input. This can lead to altered states, fugue, or perhaps just rewire your concepts to any given circumstances. We can consider these electrical interferences when
Yeah, and people are sometimes, pardon the expression, but zapped out of a fugue or reoriented through the use of electricity, usually slowly over the course of multiple rounds. But yeah, that happens.
considering how a trauma victim may set up their personal unconscious. And we can certainly see how static and electricity, and ultimately the idea of representing your trauma as a TV show, could wind up in their subconscious. Perhaps this is an elaborate puzzle by the dreamer to absolve those that were supposed to protect her. The dreamer manifests the physical representation of the defense mechanism using archetypal tropes of the 80s TV
A
cop
big
characters,
perhaps.
and they concoct bewildering circumstances that allow for justifiable exoneration. For the dreamer, there's an unsung parallel between Jeffries' sudden appearance and
Hang on.
the defense mechanism using archetypal tropes of the 80s TV cop characters, and they concoct bewildering circumstances that allow for justifiable exoneration. For the dreamer, there's an unsung parallel between Jeffries' sudden appearance and the discovery of repressed memories or unresolved traumas into the consciousness. But in my personal estimation, the dreamer is playing the long game in naming the person that they reserve all their worst feelings for, their mother. And Jeffries acts as a conduit into bringing in to existence where the deepest and darkest of her repressions, anger and rage, really lie.
Okay, that's interesting. As far as possible functions that Jeffrey serves as such a bizarre and mysterious character, uh, Tommy is suggesting here that Jeffrey's dramatic appearance in the story is some sort of uh, electronic disturbance that brings with it a breakthrough, a subconscious breakthrough, allowing via Judy or the Judy name access to the deepest, hardest core trauma, which is the repression of maybe, in some sense, the true, the true threat to this dreamer's psyche, and that is the mother, who, well, Tommy has suggested that although we can't know, the dreamer's real life is probably similar in multiple ways to Laura Palmer's, and that Sarah Palmer, especially in season 3, is serving a particular role, um, basically where the dreamer's coming face to face with the maybe the biggest suppressed collection of emotions, emotions, etc., that could really keep this person permanently derailed, and that might be the biggest battle to face is that person's relationship with the Judy or the mother character or the real life Sarah Palmer. But anyway, so Jeffries as the disturbance from, I guess, deep down within, that's allowing this battle to rise closer to the conscious surface. That's an interesting take on Jeffries. All this is speculative, of course, and the perhapses that Tommy is using in his narrative here, those are carrying a lot of weight. Those are some pretty big perhapses, but interesting for sure.
Throughout the remaining narrative of the Twin Peaks properties, Jeffries will represent a liminal figure with awareness of time's folded nature, and he'll blur the lines between dimensions. But the cost for his manipulations of official events will result in cryptic statements and confusion. Perhaps Jeffries serves as a warning not to reconfigure the nature of truth. Perhaps we can redesign reality until we've gone past our intentions and we confuse people and motives, and more so, our true selves. On the other hand, Jeffries may also represent the ultimate form of confrontation therapy. Though he engages in the tempting of fates with Cooper, leading to initially terrible results, the unintended consequence might be Carrie Page's confrontation with the many shadows of the personal drama that she designed for herself. Her scream may be the sudden recognition of her true self, not Laura Palmer per se, but that the ideas of Twin Peaks are fragments that she works to consolidate. The dreamer's decision to remove herself from the narrative of the personal unconscious, the TV show Twin Peaks, the place that she calls Twin Peaks, is likely the catalyst that pushes her closer to the consciousness and then, ultimately, closer to healing. Jeffrey.
Presumably, removing herself from Twin Peaks means the crossover to Odessa. I think that's probably what he's referring to there.
And Cooper's attempts to correct the past, leading to Laura Palmer's disappearance, is perceived as a catastrophic ripple in the temporal field. And we know this onto itself is considered a negative event by the creators of the show. But this event is also the ending of Twin Peaks, as Cooper emerges from the Red Room, indicating that he'd never really left at all, and that this is precisely when the fireman's plan is actually set in motion. In that way, it seems like Jeffries is crucial to the finalizing of Twin Peaks as a useful device to reach individuation. The next steps must be taken in a closer to level of consciousness. Wake the dreamer out of the personal unconscious, stop the repression through confrontation, 2 birds, 1 stone. Jeffries' otherworldly arrival at the FBI and Cooper's temporal disruption are symbolic manifestations of the unconscious, creating 2 distinct events that work to the same means. The FBI office, typically a mundane environment of rationality and order, becomes overrun by surreal and dreamlike chaos. Jeffries appears, though he was never there. Cooper sees himself on camera, though it's in real time. Jeffries disappears as electrical shifts reformat. The shift reflects how the unconscious reveals itself in moments of vulnerability. There's a synchronistic alignment between Jeffries navigating worlds and Cooper's using inclination as a method of navigating the unconscious. Jeffries' warnings are not rational, but they resonate with the characters in a guttural way. Jeffries acts like a variation of the magician archetype, in this case, the wizard, from this point forward, first utilizing magic to travel time spans, and then becoming a master over time. These demonstrations of intuition emphasize discovery, and they highlight memory disruption, truth, following one's instinct and self-reflection as tools for growth. For the dreamer, the nods to intuition are to reveal self-generated concepts to the generator. The process itself is asking the dreamer to interpret vague and symbolic content. Just as Cooper relies on intuition to investigate, the dreamer must trust intuitive answers to the unconscious questions implanted into their mind. So, yes, to some extent, we're faced with the quantum system of superposition, the ability to be all places until being accounted for in one, but
is that the right definition? I've been told that it might not be.
There's an echo to that and the personal unconscious, because the personal unconscious is an immeasurable field existing while your external life exists. Perhaps this quantum entanglement is occurring because the characters of Twin Peaks are all the same cluster of brain particles. On the other hand, if consciousness is a dynamic field, these links are inevitable, as all things that link together in Twin Peaks are, because they exist in the same host. Whatever the case, Cooper, who could be the dreamer's defense mechanism using the archetype of the hero, and Jeffries, who is very much an archetype of mythical abilities, are linked in cause and pitted against the forces of evil, which very much play like the physical embodiments of repression. They may not realize that they're archetypes, but they've dealt with realms of consciousness both closer to it and further away that have had impacts on their world, which they believe to be real, and they categorize these unexplained events as just that, unexplained.
Yeah,
But they're
this is
actually
trippy. Very interesting. A little hard to follow because of the levels of abstraction, where you have the Cooper and the Jeffries character collaborating, perhaps even unknowingly, against some sort of forces of evil in these cryptic ways that are sort of uh, cryptic because that allows for some sort of intuitive interpretation to take place. And maybe the crypticness allows the gut level to be reached more than any other level of human intuition. And as David Lynch defines intuition, it's a combination of like kind of the head and the gut, or the head and the heart and the gut. Um, and that the Jeffries and Cooper character are also unaware that they are these figures in somebody else's subconscious. They're unaware that they are these personal representations of universal archetypes that would look different to different people. Um, yeah, but there's a lot being said right there that's a little bit hard to track. But I guess for those who have a pretty good grip on the Jungian concepts, this would be easier to follow. For me, I find it interesting, but I'm not really the one to sort of vet the logical connections between all these speculations because I don't fully understand it, but it's pretty cool. This will be something I'm going to want to listen to again, that little 60-second segment there at the end.
also penetrate the world of the dreamer and their
Hmm.
external life. They categorize these unexplained events as just that, unexplained. But their actions also penetrate the world of the dreamer and their external life, because losing this fight could mean indefinite mental fracturing. And for this reason, Cooper and Jeffries are linked. All right, now let's talk about the synchronistic implications of Agent Cooper and Laura Palmer's Red Room experience, where Cooper surmises that Laura and he have shared the same dream.
I'm going to take a little bit of a break.
Recently, we've spoken about the historical and physical references that possibly produced the textures and real-world relevance of the Red Room. However, the Red Room extends beyond notions of Black Lodge theosophy,
Spoken a little, but not much.
with traces of Tibetan Bardo, especially the transitional elements of visions and deities one faces between worlds, and with traces of Temenos, the mental scape where people reach for individuation, and the overt references of Greek mythology, and
I just want to say that I will probably link to a video, if I remember correctly. It's from Religion for Breakfast, the pretty good channel. And it's a video about the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Bardo. And it's for somebody like me who doesn't know much about this stuff, it was the best overview that I got. I might also see if I could find this was a very long article from 25 years later, and I forget the woman's name who wrote it, but I believe she also had a YouTube series when The Return came out where she was watching it live and sort of reacting on the spot, and it was very compelling. So I'll see if I could find that as well, because that was a really extensive and extended discussion of this topic as well. But here we have the Timonos brought up again, amongst a number of other possible interpretations of the Red Room place as a sort of metaphysical realm, or maybe I don't know, maybe a place where the rules of physics are bent, and that's saying the least.
Elements like purgatory, the red room / waiting room is many things. It serves as a metaphysical union where Agent Cooper and Laura Palmer encounter each other under contradictory conditions of time, space, and possibility. This event, their meeting at the same point on two different markings of a timeline, showcases the synchronistic realities of the narrative, and it serves as a symbolic metaphor for the dreamer. Cooper and Laura's shared vision works more like a memory than it does a reality. Because when we remember, it's the us that aged forward, recalling a past circumstance in real time.
I have to think about that. But okay, maybe that was simple, but it feels like my brain is starting to hurt.
And though this experience may not be a memory of true events, the cognitive function of recall has more to do with sensory reconstruction and feeling, just as the symbols that come to us can reframe the perspective of our own memories, even if those memories are a dream.
So an imagined uh, memory perception set in the future, where memory is not reality, where memory is instead perception, sort of maybe Lost Highway style a little bit.
The knowledge of what our symbols mean is hard to grasp, and it's even harder to keep. This might explain Cooper not remembering the secrets of what Laura told him inside a working conscious that he thinks is a dream. Perhaps the Red Room presents us with an environment that collapses time and space, allowing Laura and Cooper to share experiences beyond the laws of linear reality. Physically, there's almost an exact parallel to the function of the brain's corpus callosum, with the Red Room serving as the bridge, seemingly connecting the hemispheres of time and allowing events to happen at 2 points concurrently. Relatedly, using the bridge of the corpus callosum are neural dendrites. These tree-like structures receive electrical and chemical signals from neurons, some of which evaluate the incoming data, translating it to conscious awareness.
Well, that's cool. If nothing else, the dendrites that are part of the corpus callosum connecting two different things together in one potentially meaning transportative area, being an electricity ridden tree like structure. That's pretty cool. Maybe. That's certainly one take on the chicken head.
This clearly points to the evolution of the arm, and it draws an even closer association to the Red Room as a place that sends and receives information to be processed by the dreamer. This would also give a definitive motive to the arm's doppelganger, the prevention of processing conscious information, sending the information that the dreamer needs to reconcile themselves into a perpetually repressive state of non-existence. All throughout the Twin Peaks property, it appears that the game is suppression attempting to defy the journey of self-integration. In another sense, the shared scenario of Cooper's dream also speaks to the light and shadow aspects of the dreamer's psyche. In this first encounter, Laura embodies a shadow archetype. She toys with the aspects of revealing great truths to the dreamer and operates like a figure with the ability to know the events and outcomes in the drama of Twin Peaks, whereas to Cooper, as the hero archetype, serves as a defenseless participant, navigating the dreamer's unconscious efforts to share secrets that will bring the repressed emotions of trauma closer to the surface. If synchronicity suggests that events connected through meaning, rather than causality, reveal the symbols of the unconscious, then the information traded in this dream has less to do with the information itself and more to do with the idea that the dreamer has suppressed their emotions and that they desperately need harmonization.
All right, and this just goes back to the Jung quote at the start, where the definition of synchronicity in part was that it's not two things connected via cause and effect, but rather connected via interpreted meaning, I think. So that kind of gives synchronicity a bit of a fuzzy, open-ended quality and jives pretty well with the show, with this show titled Twin Peaks and a show written with all sorts of twinning happening throughout. So I think I have a little bit better of a feel for this term, synchronicity. And I just realized I spelled it wrong over here on my screen, but who cares? Okay.
It's less important that the dreamer sees themselves as Laura Palmer in this drama of Twin Peaks, or that the dreamer participates in the personal unconscious game of Twin Peaks with their various archetypes. What's more important is that the dreamer is recognizing their repression and engages in the metaphor of the Red Room to solve the puzzle and ultimately make sense of these symbols. Maybe
Okay, that's a huge statement. There, just gonna rewind this 10 seconds.
is that the dreamer is recognizing their repression and engages in the metaphor of the Red Room to solve the puzzle and ultimately make sense of these symbols. Maybe that's why the Lodge exists. Maybe the Lodge exists as a space where a symbolic reconciliation occurs, illustrating the dreamer's journey and their need to share the darkest parts of themselves in order to move forward. In other words, to break the code, as Agent Cooper says, you must first realize that the game needs decoding. In this way, it requires both anima and animus to solve the crime and unlock the secret repressions that are the fundamental reason that we construct such elaborate, incognizant labyrinths to begin with. Perhaps this is made possible when anima and animus are translocated to areas of the mind where archetypes are distilled down to something approximating their truest essence. That place, of course, would be the collective unconscious. But rather than actually being the collective unconscious, this is a metaphor that the mind has constructed to give physical attributes to process the data. Even if the data is still confusing, the delivery system is comprised of things that we're familiar with. People,
Because the collective unconscious is unreachable, and the archetypes that come from the collective unconscious are formless in their original state, but have to sort of adopt or adapt some sort of form that is recognizable to the individual, at least abstractly, or recognizable in a coded way to the individual in their personal unconscious, as far as I know, as far as I've been told. I'm still only half a chapter into this book, which is second or third hand Jungianism anyway. But let's continue.
places, and things. The collective unconscious itself is an unobtainable location, and you'd most likely process it as just pure electricity. The whole event, Cooper and Laura sharing a
Interesting.
metaphysical reality in two different timelines, is an example of what Carl Jung describes as syzygy. Syzygy is the occurrence of the feminine and masculine in a projected state. Its intention is to consolidate the conscious and unconscious mind and to create wholeness. Through various levels of subconscious territory, as described by Jung, these projections intersect over and over, breaking into new layers of consciousness with the goal of arriving to the sentient domain causing wholeness in a person's psyche.
Symbolized by the quote unquote Z forces in Twin Peaks The Return, perhaps?
According to Wikipedia, providing a list of Carl Jung quotes, we can better understand the process of syzygy as a reconciliation of anima and animus. Jungians warn that every personification of the unconscious, the shadow, the anima, the animus, and the self, has both a light and dark aspect. The anima and animus have a dual aspect. They can bring life-giving development and creativeness to the personality, or they can cause petrification and physical death. One danger is what Jung termed invasion of the conscious by the unconscious archetype. Quote, possession caused by the anima, bad taste, the anima surrounds herself with inferior people, end quote. Jung insists that, quote, a state of anima possession must be prevented. The anima is thereby forced into the inner world, where she functions as the medium between the ego and the unconscious, as does the persona between the ego and the environment.
That's a lot there. Lot to process. Different functions that various personified archetypes from the collective unconscious that have moved to the personal unconscious could be playing. And under certain circumstances, dangerous circumstances perhaps, or negative, the anima might serve an arbitrary role between, I don't know, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to that, the ego and the something something. Yeah, and if these are symbolized through characters, either individual characters proper in Twin Peaks or fragments of characters that we feel we already know, then yeah, that's possibly interesting, but I have to go back and listen to that because that's a little bit much to take in, at least for me.
Alternately, over-awareness of the anima or animus could provide a premature conclusion to the individuation process. Quote, a kind of psychological short circuit to identify the animus, at least provisionally, with wholeness, end quote. Instead of being content with an intermediate position, the animus seeks to usurp the self with which the patient's animus identifies. The identification is a regular occurrence within the shadow. The dark side has not been sufficiently realized.
Thinking you've found the answer and you're only on floor one of a building with many floors.
So perhaps we can see an element of this in Fire Walk with Me, where Laura has found her angel, but the dreamer has yet to confront the shadow elements of Mr. C. And perhaps this accounts for the progression of traumatic elements in the real life of the dreamer, whose journey will reinstate the personal unconscious drama of the television show Twin Peaks 25 years later. Interestingly enough, the allusions to syzygy in Twin Peaks aren't just confined to the Jungian term alone. Syzygy can be traced back to Greek terminologies and refers to an astronomical event where stars or planets align.
Sorry to interrupt, but that was just interesting, the use of the word, what was the word? Revisit? Revisit the Twin Peaks drama 25 years later? Is the implication there, Tommy, that this story has sort of gone away for a while? And if so, has it gone away because the so-called Mr. C has taken over for 25 years? I'm not 100% sure there, but that's interesting. I don't think I picked up on that idea before in our discussions, and maybe I'm misinterpreting now, but it sounded like you said it's time, 25 years later, it's time for this story to reemerge in the subpsyche of this person in a big enough way where it has to be addressed again. But I could be wrong there. Anyway, back to syzygy.
Of course, we're confronted with this very concept in Twin Peaks during occurrences where a, quote, time presents itself. Just as syzygy events and conjunctions are philosophized about in pseudosciences and mysticism, we witness the metaphorical manifestations of these events in Twin Peaks as instances of magic, astronomy, and interdimensionality, though these are means to the same end as well. Cooper must intersect with Laura to get to Carrie in a closer approximation of reality, to wake the dreamer, and to instigate consciousness. Syzygy is an entirely complex concept as developed by Carl Jung, and he has many different layers by which a person goes through intervals to experience a syzygy sensation or event. The question to ask ourselves is, are we ever confronted with what you could consider evidence that this is happening? To that, I would say we can look to the coffee shop in The Return, where
Z
Dougie
forces, etc.
takes his coffee, which Mike instructs him to go toward. The name of that coffee shop is Simon's, spelled Syymons, maybe Simons, if you will. And the font of the Z shares a striking resemblance, if not the exact same one, on Tracy's cup at the very beginning of The Return. We are, in fact, being confronted with the concept that syzygy exists in this realm. Yeah.
And a lot of people think that the font is also reminiscent of the Red Room chevron floor. But anyway,
There are many synchronistic events that happen throughout the entirety of the story of Twin Peaks, and sometimes, confusingly enough, there are synchronistic events that are caused by synchronistic events, or there are synchronistic events that are wrapped inside of synchronistic events. And a good example of that is the parallel between Laura's death and James and Donna's inexplicable attraction to one another. What I mean by that is, in a
transition.
strange way, Laura's death is a catalyst that allows the dreamer to explore various sides of themselves without having to cater to their various wants and needs by being an active participant in the drama itself. So James and Donna's shared loss is probably a superficial smokescreen to spend time together. And sure, it could be an indictment, sort of, the dreamer's indictment of the type of people that the dreamer spends time with.
Or I'm going to guess it could be the bringing together of male and female investigators in a way that allows the individual to see parts of themselves that they otherwise would not be able to see if they were looking through their own eyes. So sort of vicariously creating lookers to look into you as a pair, as a duo.
But it also employs these people to investigate secrets leading to Laura's secret diary, Dr. Jacoby's tapes, and particularly in Donna's case, these events lead to metaphorical reminders of why the dreamer feels fractured to begin with. The decision for the dreamer to remove themselves from the narrative allows the characters to study parts of the dreamer that they may not otherwise explore. Donna
Mhm.
and James act as our vessel to hear the shadow of the dreamer's psyche on tape or on paper or through themselves.
Yeah, I've said this before, and what I would like to do is offer my colleague, my friend Tommy, a compliment, perhaps qualified, but I don't think so. And that is, there are many ways to interpret the different elements of this show, Twin Peaks, which is constructed to be open-ended and perhaps eternally interpretable because, 30 years later, with a worldwide population of viewers, the show is still being analyzed and grappled with. And yeah. And a whole new generation seems to be embarking on this mission as well, with the perhaps shoulders of other people to stand upon or to just do it from scratch. But anyway, Tommy's theory has something that I like. Uh, he has to stretch at times to interpret different characters and the roles they might play and the symbols they might function as. But that is the nature of the show. But what happens when he's making his stretches, sometimes with strain, sometimes not, is that he does arrive at explanations for many different phenomena in the show that end up being coherent. So James and Donna as a duo can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, but he's going to interpret them in a way that is sensible to the larger whole of his theory. And it happens time and time again enough where there is a coherence that I find very compelling. Obviously so, because we're still doing this thing together. Um, you know, he'll have something to say about Jeffries or the FBI office or season three Jeffries that is different often than what I've heard before, and not necessarily the final, nail in the coffin of interpretation because there's unlikely to ever be one, but it makes sense and it almost always provides some sort of insight. And I like that. So even with the all the Z's and the Z forces in season three, connecting that to syzygy in the way that he's doing here is interesting. And it seems like that way is being extended, I think, in the James and Donna conversation. Let's see where it goes.
So, because Laura's death is the vessel per which Donna and James can now enact their romance, they're also using that as an opportunity to do an investigation, or the opposite. They're using the investigation as an opportunity to be around each other. But in the course of that, that unlocks all of these communications which we receive and we can perceive as communications that the dreamer receives onto themselves, these secrets, these things that directly involve trauma.
This is just what I was saying earlier about if I could just extend my previous thought about the puzzle pieces being like sort of living in a way or amorphous in a way, shape shifting, sort of where we can collect all these puzzle pieces and construct as opposed to just reassemble a pre-existing meaning to construct something. And I think my pal is very good at that.
That and Donna sort of acts like a navigator that brings us into contact with some characters who only seem to speak in riddles and symbols, and other characters who seem to speak as metaphors of those that are disengaged with the real world and continue to keep their secrets locked away in a palace of secrecy itself.
I had a little interruption there. So we will resume with a bit of a transition.
You know, it's weird. I I started to develop the Carrie Page is the dreamer theory years and years ago. And the way that I got to that was an intense investigation into all of the writings and the thoughts and the philosophies that our community and the people who have written books and blogs, especially those that have sort of been taken and then consolidated into our community's understanding of the show, some of which very much exists. My investigation into Audrey as it pertains to those things. I don't know how many video essays that I went through to sort of get a better understanding of what it was that I thought that perhaps I was seeing with the character of Audrey Horne. In some sense, I think I may have been trying to.
I asked earlier why we care about various characters in this show, and I'm sure there are many reasons not to, but it's just that they each represent such mystery, and if you're compelled toward any sort of cryptic untangling beyond just like, standard level characterization and understanding of a character in that realm. But if you're compelled toward the cryptic or toward the decoding in any way, you're going to probably be gripped, by the nature of the character, and then gripped, of course, by the direction and all the aesthetics and whatnot. But that's neither here nor there. That's just to add that thought while it was in my head. Audrey Horne is a great, having completed the third season, is a great character to think about.
Project the concept that Audrey was possibly the dreamer on top of her, but I found something that was more interesting for my own self-interpretation of the show as it pertains to Audrey. Just like every other character in your personal unconscious, or every character in your dreams for that matter, since we know that those are real and you don't have to agree with whether or not you believe that dreams are something that happens to us. Just like we are
to us.
the author of all of the people and all of the events, and especially all of the motivations and symbols and secrets, should you believe that dreams include those things to be decoded. Just like we are those things, and inside of those things, we believe these stories to be real. Our personal unconscious and the drama that takes place is a real thing to the characters and yourself if you touch base with that personal unconscious. Just as when you dream, you believe that the events in that real time are real. The same is true for Audrey, but an interesting thing is happening with Audrey, where she seems to live on the border of a discovery that she's not even aware that she might make. And it's not until the return, when we see her interact with the concept that there's a song that emanates from a soundtrack that is popularized from something that she did on a television show. It's at that moment that we realize that she is close to a truth that she may not even recognize as to be one. And then, of course, she ends up in what we've sort of identified as being a mental institution, broken from her reemergence as Audrey, the girl who dances to this song. And in that way, that sort of kicked off everything about the Carrie Page's The Dreamer Theory. If you're interested in how I would have gone from one to another, it's because I couldn't reconcile the idea that Laura is the one. And it's a difficult thing to wrap your head around, because it would seem to make a lot of sense. It would seem to be justifiable to say, well, Laura is the most important. And thereby you can validate the existence of Laura Palmer and say, well, of course Laura is real. We've been told repeatedly Laura is the one. But I asked myself a question about that statement. I asked myself, what if that was sort of synonymous with Laura as the first, right? She's one. She's the thing that ignites this entire landscape. And what does
Tommy's been doing cryptic crosswords, I see. Reinterpreting one as first. That's a classic move right there.
that have to do with Audrey? Well, it has to do with the fact that she's the thing that ignites this entire landscape. And what does that have to do with Audrey? Well, it has to do with the fact that Audrey not only participates in the world of Twin Peaks, but she participates with the acting in the world of it. She will say things about dreams. She will say things about what there is and is not in real life. And then ultimately, she conducts herself as a character should and would in this pivotal moment in a scene that takes place as though it were laid out like a scene where the people in this scene are not only aware of who she is, but aware that she should dance to this song. But that doesn't make her the one. That makes the reality that she lives in a more concrete idea about whether or not this is in fact a television show. I'm not on about this idea that it's a television show that knows it's a television show. I don't think we have any evidence of that. I've never seen any evidence of that, and I've never seen anybody who theorizes that be able to stick the landing all throughout their theory. But I do very much believe that it's constructed as a television show. And I very much believe that the way that the actors are acting, the real life actors are acting, are almost a parody of how actors would conduct themselves on a soap opera. But there are clearly moments where that's not true. And there are clearly moments where we're just in the middle of some really, really great and fantastic acting. And Audrey Horne is sort of a representation of all of those things. But again, she's not the one. So in understanding what it would be to be the one, it would also, for me, it would be the reason why this personal unconscious drama even exists, right? The dreamer has revoked themselves from the unconscious drama of Twin Peaks. It's like having a dream that you're not even in. You're the overseer of it.
Extension of the James and Donna idea.
And that does occur. That does happen. It's rare, but that does occur. It's more true of a mental fracturing where you're sort of philosophizing in real time, and it's like a daydream that that you let loose of, and sometimes you reconnect with it and understand that you're having that daydream. By Laura not being a part of the beginning, it gives the dreamer the opportunity to sort of investigate these various aspects of herself through these other people. And then she's not saddled with having to have her own motivations as part of this unconscious drama. If, in fact, the show began with Laura Palmer and she was part of what was going on in that world, then she would be responsible for the motivations and the things that Laura Palmer wanted to do. By absolving herself of the work of being part of that world, it can then manifest all of her wants and desires and shadow aspects and even the best sides of herself through
That's
other
good.
characters. She can reconnect with philosophies that she believes in. She can sort of use media as a demonstration to tell herself things that she knows is true. She can.
And we all do this in a way by using external input, music, movies, art, books, etc., podcasts, perhaps, as alternate eyes to look through.
Hide her repressions behind other people that may not be real or that have different names than her real life. She can hide her repressions behind puzzles and riddles that may not necessarily be true for the world that she actually lives in. But as we get closer and closer and closer, it just becomes way, way more human, right?
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, when we take all of the complexities out of it, what we're left with is a person who's experienced some really bad stuff, and a person who probably has an alignment with the Laura Palmer character in terms of what happened to her, either by her father or a family member. We have a person who has a great deal of resentment towards people that probably knew that this was happening or that something was happening and proceeded to do nothing about it. It's interesting in the concept of syzygy. There's a big passage in the work of Carl Jung in a chapter called Concerning the Archetypes and the Anima Concept. And he shares a story about a patient of his who, unsolicited, he wasn't asked, he brings in a drawing that he's created, and the drawing is of a monster. And because Jung has his patients engage in a lot of artwork, right? And he doesn't really give them a prompt necessarily, but he asks that they create, a circle and do what you want with it. Or, hey, create an image of something that you think is important to you or something weird. So they get in the habit of this. And at some point, the patients, they'll start to do it before their next session.
This is an interruption. There are people in all fields of life that would say to Tommy, for example, you're not a Jungian. You're not an academic that has a degree in this topic. You're learning as you go. What right do you have to speak on this topic? What right do you have to keep up with your research and talk about your latest ideas as you're learning about the topic? And as opposed to having peer-reviewed, vetted, et cetera, et cetera. Um, there will always be that. And I could be totally wrong. Maybe Tommy's background in Jungianism extends a lot further back than I think. But I think he's pursuing Mark Frost's statements and saying, well, this is what Mark Frost is into, says he's into. I'm going to learn everything I can about it and see if that could help me unpack this show that I'm obsessed with. Um, so I don't think he's a step or two ahead of me on this topic. I think he's 3 or 4 miles ahead. I think he's been reading directly from the source of Jung, probably reading summaries as well, probably getting excerpts and extracts and even maybe help with certain questions. Perfectly fine. Uh, there are formal communities where scholars get studied or where topics get studied. And I've been a part of those communities from the periphery, and they have a lot of cracks from within. So, and of course, a lot of strength from within, but a lot of cracks and a lot of blind spots. So I just want to say that I give Tommy a lot of credit for basically being the quote unquote independent scholar, maybe the rogue scholar. And he really is bringing to the larger Twin Peaks discussion a lot of value that, um, you know, that is not simply just novelty, but has like a, a good grasp and a good grip on the subject. But anyway, let's continue.
And so the patient comes in with this drawing, and it's of a monster. And the patient starts to describe, I'm sure in a much more pedestrian way than Jung analyzes it in the book, but the patient starts to describe that the monster is a male and female that has had its genitalia ripped away and is
Charming.
um, and attacks in moments of sexual frustration because of that. But then the patient says that the creation is a drawing of the patient's mother. He knew in his dream that it was his mother. It's very strange that you can lay that over. You can see now in Jung's patient, you can see what happened in their past by the description of this. You don't really need to be aware of much more about the patient themselves. You can sort of build an understanding as to what they think. And then you can start to ask yourself, well, why would you even come to that in the subconscious level? What are these terrible things that must have happened to you as a child? And in the same way that that's true, that's sort of what the dreamer has done with Sarah Palmer. So in any event, there are tons of synchronicities that exist in the world of Twin Peaks, that we have something like this in popular culture, and we have had for a very long time. Something that is this open-ended and surreal, that is so well crafted and feels so trustworthy when you see it. It feels like it knows what it is behaving as. That we can project this level of speculation, theorizing over the top of it. It's not just a game of you can put anything over the top of Twin Peaks and make it look like it's talking. If you do the game right, there is a level of academia that's involved with it, but better than that, there's a great level of conversation that transpires between you and other people. And that is the coolest thing that comes out of being a Twin Peaks diehard fan. That is the absolute coolest thing. It's not as simple as just creating something that's open-ended, because the reason that Twin Peaks resonates with us is because it feels honest, right? It has that unspoken honest quality to it. It feels like it knows what it's doing. It's real. It feels like it knows it's real. Its motivations are absolute, and they're absolutely transpiring and taking place. If you watched Twin Peaks and it was just a show based on surrealism or just a show based on some weirdness, it wouldn't ring true for you. That's not enough. And that's why we make such a game out of projecting
Does Twin Peaks speak directly to the unconscious? Is that what's happening here?
what's probably in our own selves, or what our own interests are, onto it to see whether or not we can align them. And then you know what? What's inevitable is we do find alignment with other people and we have great conversation.
Okay, I think this was long enough, and I have no closing statements other than I'm glad I did this, and I'm curious to see how it turns out. Tommy, I'll see you soon, buddy. Thanks a lot, and thank you to anybody who's still here. See ya.